The following is an independently produced community access program. The viewpoints expressed are those of the community access producer and do not reflect those of Shaw Cable Systems. The program is presented in response to CRTC policy guidelines regulating community programming.
On this episode of Art Glass Today, we're going to talk about glass cutting and advanced glass cutting techniques. The first thing I'm going to determine is if my glass cutter is sharp or not. Now, I know this one is dull, so this is going to be a very good example. So when I score the glass, instead of getting a nice even score across the glass, what I'm getting is a lot of checks. So I can't see an even line. I can see deeper and some misses in the line. Now, to try to break that line requires a lot of strength. It did work, but it's not a good cutter to use if you don't have a nice sharp wheel. What happens with the wheels of the cutter when they're dull is that they get little checks in them, so they don't have an even surface to run around. To get a cutter dull is pretty easy, either if you go over your own score lines, or if you drop it on the floor, or if you lend it to somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, it becomes dull very quickly. Now this cutter I have, I know is sharp, it's because it's my cutter, and I hold in my palm of my hand like this, and when I use it and go across the glass, I can hear and feel a very even line, so that when I apply pressure and braking, it'll break along the line. So this is a cutter I'm going to be using today. When we're doing our glass cutting, we generally cut on a pattern or to a pattern. And you have to have the right width of line underneath you so that when you're doing stained glass or fused glass, you have the correct amount of space in between the pieces of glass. When I'm cutting a pattern line, what I do is I start and I push away from myself. And I do this because then I can see where I'm going with the cutter wheel, as I can always have my eyes in front of the cutter. And then I will break it with this pair of running pliers. Running pliers are put right on the seam and then pushed gently, and the glass will separate. So again, when you're cutting to a pattern, what you want to do is you want to keep your eyes in front of your cutter, so you're always moving forward, and you give yourself some room so that your body can also move forward. If you're having trouble cutting and getting even pressure, you should consider going to a lower table. That way you can put your whole body over top of your project. Now this didn't break off perfectly, so we'd either have to grind that, or I'm going to use that end in my next process. So the piece of glass that I want to keep is this big piece here. So I'm going to remove this. And that is a deep inside curve, and that's a pretty difficult technique to do. But I'll show you how to do that. What you do is, first of all, start paring down the mass of the glass that you want to remove. So what you're going to do is you're going to work in to the curve. It's important not to slide your hands along the table, because there's all these little pieces of glass ready to cut you. So you have to be very careful that way. So you see, each time I'm going in, I'm taking out about the same mass of glass. And when I get close to what I want to do, I want to come pretty even to the line of what I want to keep. Because what will happen when I break it out it will torque slightly and give me a much nicer finish. So one more cut should do it. Notice that I'm giving myself a lot of room. I can always see in front of my wheel. Run it for both ends. There. So we have a nice inside curve, cut, and ready to use. Often when you're making stained glass windows or doing fused glass, you need to have many strips, just pieces of glass that are the same length and same width. So I'm going to show you how to cut a strip of glass. First, the manual way to do it is to measure it off. And I like to use a fine tip marker. Oh, I lost my measurement already. I do 1-inch strips. And I'm just going to mark it in 3 places down the glass. And the reason I mark it in 3 places is that I will be instantly indicated if one of them is wrong. It'll be off. So they're looking good. They're all lining up. And what I need to do is I need to place my cutter right beside the ruler, and the ruler has to be set back from the marks so I get the exact right dimension. Now this ruler I'm using is special in the fact that it has cork on the back of it. And what the cork does is that it raises the surface of the ruler up above the glass so that when you apply the cutter to the ruler does not interfere with the cutting wheel. You can't just use a flat ruler, it doesn't work. You have to have it elevated from the glass. So the strip of cork works really well. If you can't find a strip of cork, you can also put a couple of beads of silicone on the back of the ruler and let it set up for a few days and then use it. So I've got my ruler set up again so that when I place my cutter on the marks, it's right in the middle of my cutter head. Now, previously when I showed pattern cutting, you always pushed the cutter. But with the ruler, I actually find it easier to pull. I keep my cutter at a almost 90-degree angle and move all the way down the line of glass. Now you notice that I have my hand holding the ruler and the glass at the same time. So this ruler isn't moving. So I will break that piece of glass. Works really well. One thing you have to do when you're using this method, besides having the correct ruler and having your marks right on, is when you're pulling your cutter, you don't push into the ruler. You don't toe into the ruler. And how I generally describe this, it's like moving your finger across a nice piece of furniture so that you're just running it along, you're not pushing into the ruler. Because if you push into the ruler, your cut will not work. It will not be straight and even. Again, pull all the way down, and then your glass will break easily. If you're doing a lot of strips, a really good tool to use is a strip cutter. And this is a strip cutter, and it is meant so that you can vary the width of your strips. And what we do is we make this board up for the strip cutter. So it's got a 1/2-inch reveal in here on a piece of plywood. So the strip cutter will go right along the board, and so you don't have to worry about holding onto the ruler, and it makes it much easier. So what you can do is measure out the distance you want your strip to be, and okay, I think that worked fairly well, but it was a little uneven because I think that the cutter head on the strip and circle cutter is not not exactly sharp, but it will likely come out this time. There you go. Again, I use the pulling motion all the way down the glass. Start close to the beginning. You don't have to start right on the edge, just right close. And constant and even pressure. And then again, give yourself room to move all the way down the glass. There. So you can do repetitive strips. You know they're going to be exactly the same width, which is really important if you're making a border or if you're making components for lamps or things like that. So this is strip cutter, a very useful tool.
While John Lafarge and Louis Comfort Tiffany were working in stained glass in North America, William Morris was creating some fantastic stained glass windows in England. As you can see from this slide, William Morris was really well known for his wallpaper. He did a lot of designs for wallpaper and also fabrics that could be used for draperies, etc. But when you look at these, you can see how he could take these and turn them into fantastic stained glass windows. The color was vibrant. He's got black lines around everything. This is one of his drawings that he had that later became a stained glass window. Again, you can see all the black lines around everything really lend itself perfectly for doing stained glass. Again, another one of his wallpaper designs. This is a design you can see the hands and faces and just the style of drawing that he and his contemporaries were doing at that time really lent itself well to the romantic style of stained glass windows. So if you take a look at those two faces and then we move on to this, you can see how it was so easy for him to move from all the different artwork that he did, which was basically watercolors and drawings for textiles, etc., into working in stained glass. William Morris really believed in the medieval ethic. He wanted to have everything in everyone's house be made by hand and have some soul to it. So as you can see at the bottom of this one, he has an inscription, and all of his windows, whether they were meant to go in a church or whether they're meant to go in a home, all had a theme. They were either on an old folk tale of some sort. He really read a lot of Norwegian folk tales, and a lot of his windows reflect a lot of the stories told in the folk tales. And you can see here again, beautiful, beautiful work. If you look at the wings, you can see the beautiful shading in those red colors. A lot of times this was done by acid etching. The glass would have been the full color of the red towards the bottom of the wings. But at the top there, all that wonderful shading would be created by using acid to actually eat away areas of the glass. So where we can still see the red remaining, wax was placed on top of the glass, and then this acid would be put on top of it to eat away the red until they got the different shades that they wanted. In the robe, you can see there's what's called silver stain is used. There was some brown paint that was used to give the folds, etc. But all those gold colors, and probably the ones also in this musical instrument, were created by using what's called silver stain. Silver stain is a silver nitrate that's placed on the back of the glass, and when it's fired, it leaves this wonderful gold look to it. I also really like the background where he's got these wonderful flowers that, again, you can see tie in really nicely with the wallpaper designs that he was already doing. Another great example, you can see the acid etching even more prevalent in the gown here, where it's very soft color with a little bit of shading. But the rope and everything that's used for this, probably an incense burner. Often they use these in churches. They would use them to create smoke and a wonderful fragrance during the service. And here again, we can see how he's used a very similar approach to this one with a different musical instrument. Wonderful, wonderful artist, William Morris from England.
Well, one thing this strip cutter can also do is make a circle. And what you have to do is remove the strip part of it and put on the turret. Again, it's adjustable, so you can make a lot of different sizes of circles. This one's a glass star. I really like it for making strips, but there is one that's a little better for making circles. And this is this German cutter. And it's exceptional. It's got a nice part on the bottom that actually suctions onto the glass, so it keeps your cutter nice and even. So I've decided that I want to make a circle that is 12 inches. So first of all, I'm going to take my piece of glass and get it closer to the size I need. So right now I've got, this is 14, I'll cut this at 14. Again, I'm going to use a ruler, a marker, and though it's not really required this to be perfect, might as well practice our cutting so that the cutter sits right on the mark. And again, I'm going to pull towards myself. If you have a large piece of glass to break off, sometimes it's easy just to use the table. You can just take it to the edge of the table and snap it. Okay, I have my piece of glass to work with. Now I've decided that I want my circle to be exactly 12 or 13 inches. I want it to be exactly 12 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from the center to the cutter's edge to get exactly the amount of distance I want. There is a ruler on this particular tool, which is pretty accurate, but not all of them have that. So I take a ruler, and so half of 12 is 6. So I'm going to make it exactly on the 6 inches. And I'm going to tighten it so it won't move. You'll notice that this cutter has a lot of different wheels in here. So I'm on wheel number 3 at the moment. What happens is when wheel number 3 is dull, you can actually shift it to the next position. This cutter is very similar to a regular handheld cutter. The wheels do get dull, so again, if you go over your score line or if you drop it or bump it, the wheel will get dull and it won't work for you. You should always take very good care of your cutters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position it on the center of the glass so that I know that I have approximately equal distance. I'm going to take it and I'm going to push down, and that suction cups the cutter right onto the glass. If your glass is clean, you won't have a problem with this, but if it isn't, you might have to clean the glass off first so that it'll suction nicely. So when we do this, it's very easy. You put your palm on the cutter, and you want to apply some pressure. There's some down pressure, not a lot, but what you want to do is you want to have your pressure constant and equal all the way around. So here we go. Hear that nice sound of cutting all the way around, and think about where you're coming back and stop right where you started. So we remove the cutter and we have the score line. Now there's a lot of different ways to break out this score line, but one way to start it running is to turn your piece of glass over and push down right on the score line. You can see the glass is starting to run all the way along. It's pretty amazing, really. Glass is not a solid, it's a super cooled liquid, so that it has a skin on the top and a skin on the bottom, and the center moves at a different rate. And so you can make glass run like this all the way along just by pushing down. So we have the entire piece of glass run all the way around, okay? So if you want to get this out clean, what we'll do is we'll take a normal cutter, and some people just go straight out. I don't like to do that because I find that if you come in like this, a little bit of an angle, and then stop right before the glass line starts, and you can just squeeze that, then this whole piece of glass will come right out. There you go, perfect circle.
We can't talk about legends in glass without talking about our own local hero, Leo Mall. Leo Mall did some absolutely beautiful work in the 1960s up until the late 1990s. This particular piece is Westworth United Church on Grosvenor in River Heights. It's called The Last Supper, and if you have a chance to go to the Leo Mall Sculpture Garden, there's a drawing for this particular project in the little display area that they have when you go into the gardens. So I like this picture because it shows you the scale of the piece. You can see what we're doing here. They were putting in a new framing for this window. The window itself is still the stained glass components are in excellent shape, but they've actually had to change the wood in this frame, I believe, twice. And so the new version was made out of aluminum, so that's never going to have to happen again. So what we have here is, I've got some highlights of these windows. And I really like, you can see we've numbered them here so we could get them back into the right place. But these faces are just really beautifully executed. This was basically clear glass, and then he's used brown paint, black paint, some enamels. Leo is really well known for using enamels, actually. And there's a little bit of controversy because enamels are not as permanent as having the color in the glass. So we're going to find out in the next 50 years whether some of those enamels start to peel off. So far, they're holding up really well. Now, one thing I found very interesting, as we go through here, you're going to see there's a number of, well, in all of his heads, they're not complete. They all have this chunk taken out of them. And I had an opportunity to ask Leo one time why he did that, because it really is an odd thing to do. And he said the reason was his kiln was not big enough to do them in one piece. Because these heads were so large, he had to figure out how to do them in sections. So you can see in here he's actually added a few different pieces, and the neck he actually used a color. And that was something I found very interesting about this window, is that all of the disciples, their faces were slightly different colors. They weren't all done in the same clear glass with the painting on them. So you can see here with Christ, for example, there's a bit of an amethyst tone to his face, which is an unusual technique. Also, his face is much stronger, and there's not anywhere near as much shading as he did in a lot of the other faces. Here again, this is a really nicely done face. I mean, look at the way the eyes are gazing upwards. You can see the detail in the hair and the beard and the face. Again, he's used a different color for the neck, just to add some contrast. This one's a lot browner than the last couple we looked at. But what a master of painting. This is a different project, and this is interesting because it has so many different people in here. And I think a lot of these people were probably members of the congregation at some point in time. You can see here there's a wonderful family, the baby, the mother, the father. Again, if you look at the faces, beautifully painted. The black for the hair was black paint. The brown for the face is a brown paint. The hair for the baby is what's called silver stain, which is placed on the back of the glass and fired on. It leaves this beautiful gold color. Here you can see the richness of all the colors, and again, more faces. I love the little bow tie on this younger fellow who's singing. He's got his hymn book in his hands, and you can see he's singing. All the faces, again, the one underneath, the fellow holding onto the bishop's crook, you can see he's got kind of a black face. You know, is that supposed to be Judas? Is this supposed to be representing someone who perhaps has had a very difficult life? Certainly not as sunny looking as the young fellow who's got his life ahead of him. Also, if you look at the background, this is very typical of what Leo Mall did with his backgrounds. He'd have a single piece of colored glass, but he would use paint to soften the look of it so that the whole window had a really soft, wonderful appearance to it. You can see here the detail. In the center of the crook, there's a lamb with a cross. If you look at the clothing, again, showing all the beautiful embroidery that would have been on this particular person, whether he was a bishop or a pope, I'm not honestly sure. The headpiece, you can see the brown circles that are painted on here. And again, he's looking up to heaven for the answer to some large question that's been posed. And here you can see this church is in the St. James area, where there's a lot of people from the forces, etc. So you can see in this section here, there's a person from the forces and a beautiful Inuit person. Again, the clothing's done so nicely, the face just wonderfully representing the subject that he was interpreting. So when you're traveling around Winnipeg and you have an opportunity to go in some church and you take a look and you can see a beautiful window like this, I think if you go carefully and look at the bottom right-hand corner, most stained glass windows are signed in the bottom right-hand corner. And see if you can see a signature of Leo Mall, and you'll know it's a beautiful piece created by our own local artist, Leo Mall.
Well, this is a glass cutting party trick that I've attempted and been successful at a number of times. We'll see if it works today. But what I'm trying to do is to make a spiral and break it out. So again, you have to try to keep constant and even pressure, which is not easy when you're going around in a circle. And try to leave enough space so that you have some strength, but not too wide so you don't have flexibility. I'm using just a piece of window glass here today, which isn't the best glass to do this with because it tends to be a little hard and not so flexible. Actually, most art glass or colored glass is easier to use. Okay, I think I've come to the end of what I can do. So I'm going to just try to get this spiral to break out. So I'm going to start a run, and then I have to use my hands to continue the run all the way along. See how it runs. Glass likes to run. Remember, glass always has to move from one side to the other. Doesn't like start changing at an acute angle. Starting to separate. You don't want to cut yourself. Don't do this at home. It's a warning. So now what we could do also is, if you remember how we got the circle out, we could turn it over and try to run it, and you could actually use something to push down. It doesn't want to do that, so to keep on using our hands. Glass is an amazing material. It does so much. It can do so much. Fiber optics. It's becoming used in the medical industry. Oh, I lost part of it, but so far. It's very, this glass is very rigid. It doesn't seem to want to be as springy as some, but see how you can do it? A little more time and patience, I'm sure I could have done the whole thing.
The proceeding was an independently produced community access program. The viewpoints expressed are those of the community access producer and do not reflect those of Shaw Cable Systems. The program is presented in response to CRTC policy guidelines regulating community programming.